So, first question I have on here is, how are you doing?
Thank you very much. Yes.
That's good. Did you grow up in Suffolk?
I did, yes. I was born in Ipswich, lived here for most of my life, and I've worked at the newspaper for more than 30 years, 20 of which as a journalist.
Christ, that's a long time.
It is.
What made you want to get into journalism?
I always liked it. Growing up, I was always fascinated by newspapers. And obviously time has moved on and the internet has taken over and other digital media, etc. But when I grew up, newspapers were generally what led the news. There was no 24-hour news on television or on the radio, really, to speak of. And primarily the source of news was from newspapers. So for me, when I grew up, I was just always fascinated with them. I got a job here when I was about 17. Worked in the advertising department for nearly 20 years and then retrained as a journalist in the late 90s. And since then, predominantly I've been the crime reporter.
Oh. Oh, my sister's like really into crime, so she'd probably love to talk to you. Like, she's always watching like true crime documentaries.
Well, it seems to be a niche for it nowadays, isn't it?
It's quite a widespread thing, true crime now online. It's like there's podcasts and documentaries everywhere, so
oh yes, it's quite an absorbing, it shows you all of human nature as well.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating psychologically wise. My sister likes psychology as well, so it's interesting to see like the shadow and all those concepts like human nature.
Yes, well, as I say, you see all sides of human nature, but generally most people are not bad people. They're just in bad situations or done something silly or stupid. Most people.
Yeah, I agree. There seems to be quite like a leaning towards people judging criminals quite harshly. Like people like to, support the death penalty coming back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you'll always get people who feel that it should be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. When you come to the point of someone being murdered or killed, I think there always probably has been, but nowadays people discuss things a lot more, and social media gives them an opportunity to vent their spleen about things. So I'm not so sure there are more or there are less than there ever were. I think it's just more of an opportunity to say their piece.
Yeah, it's more like it's kind of an echo chamber sometimes, social media. Some people are confined to their certain groups, and then things become
well, people gravitate towards those that either agree with them, don't they, or alternatively they rail against what they don't like.
So do you think much has changed regarding true crime with this like induction of the internet? No,
I think it just gives people more of an access to do what they regard as research, or to read about things, or to form their own views on things. And obviously you can go to chat rooms and leave comments places and everything else. So I think people can feel closer to the subject, or they feel that their opinion counts about the subject, and can be part of the reporting of it or the commenting on it.
I see a lot of comments on like the Daily Mail and everything.
Yes, I mean the whole thing is sort of reader interaction and encouraging people to sort of take part and say what they think. Newspapers always had letters pages, but those were fairly structured and not necessarily tolerant, but they were checked before things went in the paper, and decisions were made as to whether to allow them to go into the paper or not. Whereas the internet has a lot more free range.
Like sometimes you get moderators, but usually people are allowed to say whatever they want, to be honest.
Well, to a large extent, that is true, I would think, but then that's up to them.
1 second, I just need to check that you're in shot properly. Just moving it a bit. I have to make sure that it's perfect. What are the biggest profile cases you've worked on as part of the Ipswich Star or the East Anglian Daily Times?
I've worked on Steve Wright murders in 2006. I've worked on double murders, where even worked on murders where 14, 15-year-old boys have killed someone and murdered someone. Another one where a 15-year-old girl killed her father and another woman in a double murder, along with a 41-year-old man who was also convicted. Numerous murders that I've done, all of the high-profile ones in Suffolk. I've interviewed the mother on numerous occasions of the man convicted of the Essex Boys murders down in Rettington, which was quite a famous set of murders where 3 drug dealers were lured down a country lane near Chelmsford and then basically assassinated in a gangland hit. And one of the men who was convicted of it, who was always denied that he was guilty, came from Suffolk, and his mother still lives in Suffolk, and for 20 years they've been trying to get him an appeal and overturn the conviction. So I've spoken to her on numerous occasions and done an interview with him in prison. So I've worked on quite a lot of cases, the higher end of the scale, but also others where there've been child sex abuse scandals at schools, and which have been national cases when it's happened. I've worked on those as well. So through a whole gamut of crime, really. It's not only the top end of crime that I work on, but some of the more high-profile ones that may have been heard of beyond Suffolk. I've worked on them all over the last 20 years.
So do you often get to interview people close to the crime?
It rather depends, I suppose. Obviously, when things happen, you can interview families if they wish to speak to you, or people who may have known the deceased. But when people are arrested, you're limited to an extent as to what you can do, especially with families or with people who may have been witnesses, and you may have to wait until after a court case to interview those people, even on occasions victims, obviously of attacks or sexual abuse. You can speak to them, but only after they've given evidence in court and discharged their duty. Otherwise, it's contempt of court. So yeah, I speak to as many people as I can. It's not only the police I speak to, or people within maybe the judiciary, prosecutors, barristers, etc. I'll speak to everybody, but you can only do it at the time you're allowed to do it.
So it's sort of decided for you when you can do certain types of interviews.
Well, to an extent. If no one is arrested or anything, you can interview anybody if they wish to be interviewed, or if they're happy to talk to you. But obviously there are legal restrictions when what they call proceedings are active, which is at the point of arrest.
Well, I actually didn't know that information, so thank you. This links to the previous question. What is your personal favourite criminal case you've had to run a report on?
Oh, there've been an awful lot. Some of them aren't necessarily at the top end of the scale. Sometimes there's an old saying that little fish are sweet. Sometimes it's a very minor case, but it might be why someone has done something or how they've been caught that sort of sticks in your mind or makes the story. So it's not always about murders or armed robberies or abuse scandals or anything like that. Sometimes it's what people have done or why they've done it, or how they've been caught. So I quite often like an amusing story about someone hiding under a bed or in a bed drawer, divan bed drawer or something, when the police are trying to shake them out of it when they're trying to arrest them. Those type of cases sort of tend to bring an element of humour to things, because you don't get a lot of humour in the stories that I write. One of the most fascinating cases, and probably the most fascinating I would think, is the Eddie Maher case, just because people saw it, I think, a little bit at the time, a bit like Robin Hood. Somebody who had planned maybe the perfect crime, got away with it, nobody knew where they were, the police didn't seem to know where this man was, and for 19 years he got away with it, and then to suddenly be caught in America, just in a town that nobody had ever heard of over here, after 19 years, it was a worldwide story. Everyone was interested in it, and then to follow it through when he was brought back, it went on for more than a year, I think, or certainly up to a year by the time that he'd been arrested, extradited, and then gone through the court process over here.
Yeah, it did take a while because obviously there's that transatlantic respondence and going through all the different proceedings.
Well, that's right. For the police and the legal profession, there are huge complications because he's in a different country. There needs to be extradition. You need to tick all the boxes for extradition, but he's created a life for himself over there. They need to make sure that they've got everything they have that they need to charge him when he comes back in the country, because as I understand it, when you extradite someone back to a country, you can't interview them, you have to charge. So they have to have everything, they have to be ready to go to court. At the moment someone is brought back into the country, it's no good bringing them back over here and questioning them about the crime. You need all the evidence and ready for court. So the police need to do that. It's a very time-consuming procedure, and of course people like Mr. Maher probably are reluctant to come back as well. So from that perspective, it makes it even harder. It will, those sort of stories will travel, and they will continue for a length of time from the start to the conclusion.
Yeah, he did actually. He had a son that was born the same year as me over in America in 1997,
oh, really?
Which is interesting.
Yes.
Because his sons were raised American, and Lee thought he was an all-American boy, but
yes. I mean, Lee, I seem to remember when Maher was arrested. I seem to remember that Lee gave an interview to some of the American press about being completely surprised, had no idea who his father was, questioned who he was because he always thought he was Lee King, and had no idea that his father was a wanted man or what his father had been accused of. Subsequently, that proved not to be true.
Yeah, I read about. Sorry. I need to make sure it's not turned itself off.
It's alright.
Still getting used to using cameras. I'm more of an editor myself, so
yeah, fair enough.
I'm not very used to directing. So, how long has it been since you talked about this case in an interview or just in general?
Oh, I don't think I've ever been interviewed on camera about it. Occasionally I speak to somebody who was a colleague at another media at the BBC who was also working on the case, because it's a friend of mine, so just occasionally it comes up in conversation, such as when Eddie Maher brings out his book, or just something happens to sort of prompt the conversation. But it's probably about 3 or 4 years really, but since I had a good discussion about it with anyone.
Yeah, I'm surprised, honestly, this is like a totally different question, but I'm surprised there hasn't been like a film or an episode of a TV show like made about him yet.
Yes, I'm a little surprised. I mean, it's a true crime story, but for a man who people thought got away with it for 19 years and then had been found, but he managed to stay ahead of the authorities for that length of time and stole what was an enormous amount of money at the time, still a considerable amount of money. But you've got to remember that we're going back 24 years now. You've got to remember that 1.2 million then was worth an awful lot more than 1.2 million is now.
Yeah, I read that because the lottery didn't exist back then, but it was like he'd sort of won the pools. I think
that's right. Yeah, it was the football pools at the time.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and say you could I said buy what you wanted for 1.2 million. I mean, to an extent that was true. Property prices were a lot lower. Cost of living was a lot lower. Having said that, you still 1.2 million. And with the focus that was on the crime at the time, it's very hard to make 1.2 million last a lifetime, especially when maybe that isn't all yours.
Yeah, I read in the book that I can't remember if it was you or someone else who predicted that he would have run out of money around 1997.
Yes, it wouldn't have been me that wrote that, but yes, I think it was. I think it was suggested that he'd run out of money because he had to start working again. He'd to keep one step ahead of the law and to finance yourself in the way you need to do it. 1.2 million or even a lesser share of 1.2 million isn't going to sustain you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, he started working like around 97 when his son was born, so I'm guessing the money sort of went away very quick.
Well, at one stage he was bankrupt. I think possibly in 2010, was it?
Yeah, he declared bankruptcy.
He declared bankruptcy
in 2010.
and ended up working, if I recall correctly, for a telecommunication company.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, the money ran out. The American dream was fine as long as it lasted, but it must bring with it a lot of pressure. Keep moving from one place to another, looking over your shoulder, being careful as to who you tell what, and remembering not to do certain things, or maybe not to stick your head above the parapet, really.
Yeah, must have been, those 19 years must have been like very hard, because he'd have to be constantly looking over his shoulder. I remember him saying, I read about him saying that he was glad because he was in a sort of prison the whole time he was on
Yes,
the
well, may well be the case. There may be a sense of relief when that type of thing happens. I would suggest that any joy or relief that there was tempered and outweighed by the fact that he was going to spend a length of time in prison, both in America and then over here, on top of which everything that he had in America was gone. So yeah, I mean, to a certain extent there's an element of relief, I would imagine, but the converse side to that is your world and your family's world is shattered.
When did you first hear about the Eddie Maher theft, and what were your initial thoughts on it?
Well, that happened before I came into journalism as such. My colleague Richard Cornwell was the Felixstowe reporter at the time, and on the day it happened was working and went out to the scene. But when I came into journalism, I mean, Eddie Maher's name was known. Don't quite know who gave him the sobriquet of Fast Eddie, whether it was ourselves locally or whether it was other media, I don't know. But people knew of him, and he were constantly doing updates. I mean, when I came in, one of my colleagues was sent over because he was supposedly seen, or there was a suggestion that he went to Boston. But I think what happened was originally his partner Debbie took Lee over to Boston and ended up getting put up in a hotel over there on the pretext of waiting for him to come over, because he had supposedly told her that they could go on holiday. He got a bonus from work, but he couldn't come out the same day, and it'd be easier or cheaper if she went with Lee, and then he'd follow them out there when he finished his shift, because he had to work. So one of my colleagues, we found out in the late 90s that supposedly there was a link to Boston. And one of my colleagues actually got sent out there to see if he could follow the trail, but it didn't lead anywhere, to be fair, in the end, because obviously he'd already moved on. I mean, we're talking about 5 years after the theft.
I think it was Brad Jones who actually...
That's right.
I remember reading about that. He went out to Boston. Obviously, it had been so long and it was such a regular occurrence that people obviously didn't remember. No,
well, the trail had gone cold by then, and an English crook who stole a bit of money is small beer to, I'd imagine, to the Boston Police Department. We were following a trail that had long gone cold, and it was probably going to be very hard for any particular interest to be shown from the Boston Police's side of things, without being rude to them, but they have their own priorities, and we were talking about something that happened 5 years before.
I think because the police took a long time issuing the statement about that information, didn't they? So
yes, I mean, for them it was an ongoing investigation. They won't be wanting to give away too much as to what they knew. They review cases. Police generally over here in this country play their cards very close to their chest, because they don't want to give away, maybe what they've got that might provoke somebody to go even deeper underground. We'll probably give you another 15 minutes, but beyond that.
Okay. Let's see. What did you think of the public opinion surrounding Maher before, after, and while you were reporting on him? Do you agree with any of it? Did you hate any specific parts of it?
I never spoke to any members of the public, in truth, about Mr. Maher and what their thoughts were, but I'd imagine many people had a sneaking admiration. There was supposedly this sort of Robin Hood side to things. But he hardly stole to give to the poor, did he? Nobody else was the beneficiary of it other than those that were involved in the theft. I can't imagine he would have done it on its own. Well, he didn't do it on its own. It was said in court at his sentencing that it was believed other people were involved, and therefore they must have taken their share. I think, though, many of the public probably had a sneaking admiration. At the end of the day, he stole money from his employer, Securicor, in a bank. He didn't, steal it off an individual. The bank was insured. The Securicor were insured, and ultimately, I wouldn't say people saw it as a victimless crime, but I think it probably didn't have the same resonance that it would do if, for instance, he'd gone into a millionaire's home, for instance, and beaten them over the head and stolen £1 million out of their safe. I don't think people quite saw it in the same way, and I think there was a sneaking admiration probably for what he had done, and there was always this fascination, where was he? And I think that was more to do with it rather than admiration of what he did. It was more that he'd managed to drop out of sight, stay ahead of the authorities for however long he stayed ahead of the authorities, and where was he now, and what was he doing, and what had the money been spent on.
It was sort of like people were living out their fantasies in this.
Yeah, I think that probably a lot of people sort of had this, what would I do with £1 million, or, how would I spend it, how would I, disappear, or where would I go, if I had the choice. And I think, there is that element in people's minds to think like, but at the end of the day, he was the man who stole £1.2 million.
Yeah, because people are still talking about it today, because the reason why I'm doing the documentary is because my sister and my dad were talking about it, and I found it quite interesting.
Yeah, so as well, as you said earlier, crime is a fascinating subject that many people, seems to me anyway, many people can get more interested in now than they used to be. Years ago, people would have newspapers and that would be it, or they'd see the television news and that would be it. Occasionally a book would be brought out. But now you see on all the channels that we have, on satellite television, you see so many real crime programmes from all over the world, but particularly America and Britain. And it's become a little industry in itself, making these sort of documentaries, because people have this thirst for, true crime.
Yeah, because there's maybe sort of an element of the desensitisation of violence over the years, because it's incredible to think that in the 60s you had people fainting at like Psycho when there's not even any on-screen violence.
Yes, I think there is this desensitisation when you come to films. I think people are a lot less squeamish about what they see. I would suggest to you that if they were to see something happen in front of them, they would be completely traumatised, possibly more so than people would have been 50 years ago. Because I think in this day and age we're used to this vicarious lifestyle where everything can be seen through the prism of a television screen or through our mobile phone or our computer. When something really happens in front of you, I would imagine that many people would be very traumatised by it. Whereas I'm not suggesting they wouldn't have been 50 odd years ago, but it was a different generation, and many of whom had come up through the war years and had seen many things that you would hope nobody would ever see. So I think it was a very more structured society, and a society that was maybe more used to seeing certain things that we're cosseted from now, and we have the luxury of seeing through television screens or computers or telephones.
Because obviously there was a lot of war back in the day, but you see this pattern of people online finding some sort of anonymity and becoming sort of violent through that.
Yeah, I think people are affected. There have always been people who are either psychopaths or will be affected by mental illness or something, and I say choose, but are compelled because of their illness possibly to carry out very violent acts. I would suggest to you, the more that you see something, the more normal it can become in your mind. And if you have maybe an illness, or if you have if you have certain thoughts in your mind, maybe they can be magnified or polarised by what you do see. I think it's a very lame excuse to say that, you're either reporting it's art imitating life, or you're picturing a realistic situation, because I think the consequence of you picturing that and continuing to do that, and people being exposed to that type of thing, can, blur the edges of, reality and non-reality in people's minds who maybe have an illness. Or maybe are more malleable in their mind as to, thinking, it's just they can't necessarily differentiate between reality and illusion.
You still see this stigma though associated with mental illness, but it's not as bad as it was a few decades ago, but it's still there. Like, people tend to, whenever there's violent crimes like shootings or bombings and that sort of thing, people tend to just jump to the conclusion that it's a mental illness related. So what are your thoughts?
I have none in particular. I mean, people do what people do. Where do you draw the line between mental illness and criminal mind? I think you've got to be an expert to do that. There are many people who may have suffered from a mental illness, but criminally they know exactly what they're doing when they do it, which makes them a murderer or a criminal. It doesn't make them, it doesn't make them mentally ill to the point where they can absolve themselves of what they have done in law.
So people are responsible for their own actions, really.
Yeah, I don't believe there are many people, but some people are evil.
I'd say I agree with that assessment.
Yeah, everyone can say, well, it's not normal, and you've got to be out of your mind to do that, or you've got to have some sort of mental illness to do that. But ultimately, then you'd absolve everyone from that. You'd absolve Hitler from all of his crimes. And Stalin from everything that he did. And all the despots and dictators who kill people. Are they mentally ill? You could say possibly they are, but they still know what they're doing and they're still responsible for it.
Yeah, that's...
Anyway, I've got probably about 5 minutes.
Okay. Let's see.
If you want to know about Eddie Maher, I just start asking.
So what part of the process did you report on? Was it like the 2012?
Yes, I was called into my editor's office. We had a call from an American radio station in Ozark. Now they, if I remember correctly, I think are something like 6 hours behind us, or were in terms of time. And they left a message on, they phoned up my colleague Richard Cornwall, because they Googled when they found out who Eddie Maher was, and this story began to evolve in America. They Googled to find out if anyone had ever done anything on it before, or who had done it. And my colleague Richard had done numerous stories on Eddie Maher, and it had just passed the 19th anniversary of the theft. So we did a piece on the 19th anniversary, and we wondered actually if somebody had seen it online and dobbed him in because of that. As it transpired, I think that was just coincidental. So we'd done this piece anyway. The American, the local radio station, can't remember the name of it, but there's like 4 letters.
KSPR.
Could work. Yes, it was KSPR. A man from the radio station tried to contact Richard at our Felixstowe office, left a message on the answer phone because it was overnight. Richard picked it up first thing in the morning to find that all of a sudden Eddie Maher had been caught. I got called into my editor's office as the crime reporter. He'd followed the story closely as well, my editor, after being told by Richard that Eddie had been caught. And at one point, suggested that I might like to start packing a suitcase to and see what the flights were like to get over to Ozark in Missouri. As the day transpired, though, with the wonders of the internet and communications nowadays, I actually sat in an office in Ipswich, or an open plan office at my desk, and waited for the sheriff's office to open in Ozark, Missouri, and come 2 o'clock our time in the afternoon, I think, which I thought would have been 8 o'clock their time. I found the telephone number and rang it, and ended up speaking to the sheriff, who told me all about the arrest. The American law enforcement, from a journalistic perspective, fantastic, because they tell you everything. Over here, people are more guarded about what they can tell you because of the legal process. Over there, they basically tell you, we've got our man, even just on arrest, before charge or before a trial or anything. And the free flow of information is such where you get to learn basically everything the Americans believe they know about either a particular crime or a particular person. And gradually, as the day wore on, I made more calls to America, and unfortunately I never did get my trip across to the United States, because I managed to get all that we needed to get over the telephone, by just interviewing as if I was sitting across the desk from them. So we did all that, and then about, I can't remember, this must have been towards the end of a week, I should imagine. This must have been a Tuesday or Wednesday, and then towards the end of the week we got an email, and the email had been sent out, I think, to quite a lot of media, and it turned out to be from an ex-girlfriend, or the ex-partner of Eddie Maher's son Lee. And it would appear no one had responded to this email whatsoever, and I happened to be working on a Sunday night shift, and I had other duties to follow. And we'd done the story, and we found a picture of him, because again, American prisons, you can just go online and you can look at any inmate, what they're in for, get their picture and everything, and their weight and height and colour of their eyes and everything. So we found a picture of him, first picture, etc. Anyway. So on a Sunday night, I got to a point where I managed to clear most of my work, and I thought, well, I'll respond to this email. So I responded to Kayla Jacoby, her name was, who, as I say, was the high school sweetheart, I think she was, of Lee, Eddie's son. Anyway, I ended up phoning her up at night, again, on a Sunday night, from my desk in the office, and it turned out that she told me that Lee had told her about Eddie and his background. She was able to fill in some blanks. It also turned out that she had at least one child by Lee, and that Eddie was a grandfather. I asked for pictures. She sent me pictures. She sent me pictures of the graduation of Lee with Eddie and Debbie either side. I think she sent me pictures of herself. Then she told me about 2 other women who she was in contact with, who Lee had children by once their relationship was split up and he moved on. So I managed to find their telephone numbers and phoned each of them. And by the end of my shift, I had 3 women who had children by Lee, who were Eddie's grandchildren, who could give me an idea of what their lifestyle was like, the Maher lifestyle was like. On top of which I had pictures and everything. They just emailed them. So by the end of my shift I had all this, and it also transpired that Lee had won, I think it was, $100,000 in the Missouri lottery.
Yeah.
I found that out as well. But unfortunately, I think the money had slipped through his hands for a number of reasons. But they told me all about that. And all of a sudden, again, it just opens up another avenue for you, because what people are interested in is, where had Maher been? What sort of lifestyle was he living? What was he doing? What was he like? Were the family quite guarded? Were they quite open? How were they integrated into the American lifestyle? And all of these things. Did they ever give you a clue what had gone on? Had he ever said anything about his background? And all of these things. So parts of it started to come out, and it all made it very interesting. And after that, suddenly found the pieces that I was doing were either used or followed up by media in this country and in America. It's quite a surreal thing, really, seeing your work from a small sort of Suffolk newspaper suddenly being in the nationals in this country, and also in America.
Oh, you must have felt very good when that happened.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's just sort of I wouldn't say childish sense of pleasure, but it's one of those things where it gives you a bit of a glow, thinking, well, you've done something other people are following up, because the whole part of the reason for being a journalist is to find out things that other people don't know, and when people follow you rather than you following other people, and you're getting calls from America and various places in this country as well, all of a sudden you think, well, you are leading the way, you're breaking the story, which makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, like you're getting the scoop. You're people are following your lead. Like all the articles I've looked at, I keep seeing that graduation photo. It keeps popping up. So.
But I only got it because I responded to an email.
Yeah.
Nobody else did. I mean, that email wasn't only sent over here; it was sent to other media in America. But what Lee had said is he didn't know his father's background, and his ex-partner was very unhappy about that, because one, he owed maintenance for the child anyway, so there was this element of, from her point of view, she felt that he'd got away without paying for his child, and she was having to bear the brunt of that, on top of which she felt that he was not telling the truth, and wanted to tell people, and I listened. And that's the only difference between me and other journalists maybe elsewhere who received the email. For whatever reason, nobody saw fit for a couple of days to follow that email up.
Wow. Yeah, he sort of followed in his father's footsteps, really, with the mismanagement of a big amount of money.
Well, all I know is what I've been told, and you hear one side of the story, and Lee never spoke to me, to be fair. So I wouldn't, put it this way, I wouldn't decry Lee, because I don't know him, he hasn't spoken to me, I've only spoken to people who've got one side of the story to tell. People have to draw their own conclusions from what either they can read or have seen. Right, I really need to go very shortly, so have you got anything else that you want to ask?
Do you believe a crime is much more substantial when there's violence involved, or do you think both non-violent crimes and violent crimes can be as bad as each other depending on the circumstances?
Depends on the level of violence, I think. I mean, I don't think anybody could say that a non-violent crime was the same as a violent crime. A murder or something where someone has received life-changing injuries or life-changing trauma due to being attacked in some way, can't be the same as just having some money stolen. It just can't be the same as having some money stolen. Just because of the level of life-changing injuries or violence or trauma that you've received, lasts a lifetime. Money is money. For instance, in America, there's a famous case in the last 5-10 years of Bernie Madoff, who ran a hedge fund, I think it was, where people could invest and they get back loads of money, and the returns every year were fantastic. Now, a lot of rich and powerful people invested in that scheme, and it was thought he was a financial genius. It turned out to be what they call a Ponzi scam, and a Ponzi scam basically is, if I go to 10 people and they give me £1,000 and I've got £10,000, I can spend £5,000 on myself for my lifestyle and being rich, and then come the end of a year I can pay them a dividend each of, say, £500. But I've got no money. But what I have to do is get more investors to give me money. So the whole thing is built on a foundation of nothing. So it's only the foundation is how much money you can continue to get in. It's not being invested anywhere. You are just taking part of it for yourself, and you're giving people a bit back in interest, who are quite happy they're getting a bit back in interest. But that will only continue for as long as you can get more investors to sustain the scheme. Now, something like that wiped out a lot of people and their life savings, and so people basically lost their homes because of it. Something like that has a major impact, and I'm not suggesting that that doesn't have an enormous impact on somebody, but it's what they call white-collar crime. It's not a violent crime. It's not a murder. It's not life-changing injuries. It's not a sexual crime where somebody has got to live with the trauma of what they go through. So I don't see that a very violent crime is the same as a non-violent crime.
Interesting.
Okay.
Do you have to go now?
More or less. I'll give you one more question if you want it. But I really do have to get on with things.
Well, this is what I sort of asked you this earlier, but he claims in his new book that he was forced to commit the theft by 3 criminals. Do you believe this at all?
Well, to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter if I believe it or not. I mean, if that's what he says, that's what he says. I believe that's what he told police during his, I wouldn't say during his interviews, but that's what he probably claimed, as his defence. That wasn't what was said in court by the prosecution. Who knows who's right? I would suggest that the prosecution had probably forensically backtracked everywhere they could to see where all the links in the chain were, and what the prosecution had alleged. They named specific people who were involved, along with Eddie Maher. I don't believe those people were ever named outside the court case because, and I don't even think they were named in any court reporting of the sentencing, because, in fairness, they had no right to. They had no way of turning around and denying anything. It was just an allegation. So I don't think any of the journalists in court that day published any names. Mr. Maher basically says that 3 criminals turned up, threatened his family, and basically forced him to do it, and then gave him a cut of money to lead a new life elsewhere and to keep him quiet. Who's to say where the truth is? I think you have to pay your money and take your choice. The only thing I would say is that what you're taking, if you believe that side of it, is you're taking the word of a man who was stolen £1.2 million when he was in a position of trust, against the word of police and the legal system in this country. Doesn't mean to say he's wrong, but you are taking the word of a man who stole £1.2 million.
So it's sort of like he said, she said, to be honest, because there's not really a whole lot of evidence from that period of time.
Well, as I often used to say to people who, maybe young journalists at the start of their career, who sort of believe everything you're told, I could tell you that I think I look like George Clooney, but that doesn't mean I look like George Clooney. Don't stop me saying it.